Greatest time of year. It is the magical season that is Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday, the greatest holiday of them all. And that also means a big time weekend in college football. And regardless of all the chaos around the Big 12 this season, there are still some big games, and your West Virginia Mountaineers are involved in one of those big games, kind of the annual rite of passage or annoyance maybe for Mountaineer fans against Oklahoma. So we'll see what happens this year. This is our From the Other Side series as it continues to preview the Mountaineers game with the Oklahoma Sooners. I'm your host here, Mike ASTI on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, WV Sports Now. And I'm now going to be joined by Johnny Hoover, who is the publisher of SI Sooners, the Sports Illustrated affiliate, allsooners.com. And John, first off, I definitely appreciate you taking the time here. I enjoyed your little background there as we're both rocking the home studios. So first off, I definitely appreciate it. And then as we jump in here, I guess first things first, this is a little different for Oklahoma than most years where they're vying for the college football playoff. That's basically done for pretty much everyone in the Big 12. I think that debate and that conversation is pretty much a moot point at this point. And really because Oklahoma dropped those two games early in the season. Seems to be a different Oklahoma team now than we saw early in the year. And it was an Oklahoma team that even Lincoln Riley kind of alluded to when he was speaking to the national media before the season. This might not be a national championship contender this year. There might be some growing pains early on. We did see that. So I just kind of want to simply ask you as we kind of get underway, how is this Oklahoma team different than it was early in the year? I know it's a loaded question, but it's certainly appearing to be very, very different than what would have been the case early in the year. It almost kind of feels like the Mountaineers are a little unlucky to when they're playing Oklahoma potentially.
Yeah, Mike. You could say it's a loaded question. I'm okay with it. The simple fact is it's the story of the season for the Oklahoma Sooners. They start out for the first time ever, or the first time in 22 years, I guess, 0-2 in conference play. Can you imagine a Bob Stoops team starting 0-2 in conference play? Never happened. So we'll go back to the John Blake years, 1998, I think. So what are they doing now? They're stomping people into the grass is what they're doing now. How did this happen?
Right.
You know, they're a young team. You see a bunch of sophomores, a bunch of redshirt freshmen, a bunch of true freshmen getting on the field, and not just in spot duty, but a lot of playing time. And then they had a young quarterback, redshirt freshman, Spencer Rattler. Never played college football before on a consistent, he got in some mop-up duty for Jalen Hurts and things like that, but it wasn't his team. Well, now it's his team. They needed him to come back. They needed him to throw some touchdown passes and some big completions in those losses to Iowa State and Kansas State. He didn't do it. They got outscored in the fourth quarter. Spencer Rattler comes on. He goes a 3-and-out, punt the ball. Here comes the other team, touchdown. Spencer Rattler comes out, throws an interception. Game's over. Just like that. Both of those games turned just like that. So now you've seen Spencer Rattler maybe grow up a little bit in the Red River rivalry for sure. The overtime, the touchdowns that he was able to produce against Texas and 4 overtimes against Texas in that big rivalry game. So I think he really grew up that day. And then you throw in the addition of really, for my money, honestly, I'm saying this as earnestly as I can here, the Sooners' 2 best players. Their best defensive player, Ronnie Perkins, defensive end, was all Big 12 2 years in a row, got suspended for the Peach Bowl last year, finished out his 6-game suspension 5 games into this season. Then Ramondre Stevenson, certainly probably the most physically gifted player on the Oklahoma offense, a big running back, 6 foot, 245 pounds, 2,000-yard runner in junior college, his sophomore year in junior college. So the kid's potential is just unlimited. So they literally, at midseason, got their 2 best players, their 2 most gifted players, their certainly most dominant players. And what you've seen is Oklahoma respond by just kicking the crap out of everybody ever since.
To say the least. It appears that it's an Oklahoma team that was able to progress and get better as the season continues, and maybe an Oklahoma team that you want to watch out for next year, regardless of maybe what happens here throughout the offseason. But recent weeks, Oklahoma coming off a 41-13 win, 69-9, 62-28, 33-14. The list can go on and on after those two losses that you mentioned. And most importantly, offensively, you mentioned quarterback-wise, a kid who hadn't had the experience, now developing that experience. Offensively, they've been blowing the doors off teams, and that's the most important thing, because the Big 12, it's rare for a team defensively to be so strong, although this can be very, very interesting, John, as I'm sure you're kind of, as you're previewing this game, alluding to as well to your fans. There's an argument to be made this is the best defense Oklahoma has seen this year, certainly in recent weeks. So certainly the argument is there that if WVU would have played this Oklahoma team earlier in the year, they certainly could have been a team to upset the Sooners. This is a much more powerful Sooners team now, who's progressed, has more players, is better, but they are facing the Mountaineers defense, which was ranked number 1 in the country just a few weeks ago, as surprising as that sounds, is definitely different than facing the defense of Kansas or Texas Tech, which was 2 of the last 3 opponents. So that's an interesting thing to see, the Oklahoma offense versus the West Virginia defense. And in the recent games between these two, obviously the Mountaineers have had offenses that could hang with them in the past. I don't know if they've had a defense this strong to be able to hang with the Sooners, so that certainly makes this interesting. John E. Hoover joining us here on our From the Other Side series to preview WVU and Oklahoma this Saturday night. So the Mountaineers at least getting off the accustomed noon kickoff throughout this season. They're finally getting into a nightcap with a primetime game. That's going to be interesting to finish out the Thanksgiving weekend here. Pittsburgh Sports Live, of course, WV Sports Now, where you can find this program. John, I mean, obviously this team is different. This Oklahoma team is different. I do want to ask you, though, what was the perception early in the season, and how has that changed in terms of Oklahoma fans? Because we also, and I've talked with everyone around the Big 12 this season. It's very similar, I guess you could say, to my conversation with somebody who covers the Texas Longhorns in terms of the 2 historic programs to get the benefit of the doubt in the Big 12 that the college football playoff would love to see more than, say, the others. But Oklahoma, starting off with those 2 losses, regardless of who's playing there, and they don't have the normal Heisman candidate, Baker Mayfield, et cetera, that they were used to, but still, that was just a very surprising thing for the casual fan to probably see. In terms of the Oklahoma fan, though, who followed this team all year long, how surprising was that, do you feel, for the Oklahoma fan? Were you seeing Oklahoma fans jumping off the bandwagon and freaking out? And then in terms of the Oklahoma fan, is there any angst around even Lincoln Riley, who's had success, taking him in the college football playoff? But it has been 20 years since a national championship, despite all of these appearances and being very close with flirting with one. Oklahoma's a historic program, the likes of Ohio State, the likes of Alabama, but less recent success for sure. Is there an Oklahoma fan base that's clamoring, that's getting close to saying, or maybe was saying, we got to win a championship here soon? As unreasonable as that sounds, a 20-year drought in college football. I mean, the Mountaineers are top 15 in wins in history of college football overall, and have yet to win a national title. But for Oklahoma, it's a little different.
I got to say, I post a lot of our content, links to a lot of our content in various OU fan Facebook groups.
I'm sure you do.
0-2, with that 0-2 start, you heard the Facebook folks, the population on Facebook. Lincoln Riley is outserved his usefulness here. It's time for Lincoln Riley to move on. Okay. We need to fire Lincoln Riley and get a real head coach. He's too in touch with his feels. He's not a tough enough coach. He's letting these guys do whatever they want, walk all over him because
he's friends with them with his age. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I've seen Lincoln Riley kind of pull his team out of the stinker before, right, and get them into the championship game and into the college football playoff. He's done it before. Let's see if he can do it again. Now, you're right, obviously. I think we all agree. But, by the way, while we're taping this, the college football playoff reveal show, the first one, is being done right now. So
Sure.
I look forward to seeing what those numbers will be. We'll have a story up at SI Sooners later, I'm sure. But
it will be
yeah,
interesting on how close Oklahoma
over.
is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I will say that as much as I mean, obviously they're not going to be in the top 4 right now because of those 2 losses, and there's not as much wiggle room with Notre Dame beating Clemson. If Clemson would avenge the loss, Bama running the table, Ohio State getting the benefit of the doubt because of COVID and running the table, I don't see how you're fitting anybody else in since they're not willing to expand this year. But it will be interesting how close Oklahoma is, because if they get even into the top 10, that pretty much is the committee saying that if you would have dropped only one of those 2 games, we probably would have squeezed you in. That's what Lincoln Riley's done in recent years, where he dropped 1, not 2. The 2 losses, that's really the eliminator right now.
Well, they've been behind the 8 ball all season long. The question becomes, they're 14 in the AP poll. They're 14 in the coaches poll right now.
Right.
What are the dozen or so people, the 13 people who rank that thing in Grapevine, Texas, what do they think about this Oklahoma team? That's what I want to know. And like you said, it's going to be interesting to see how close they are. I would almost guarantee you that they're higher than 14, where the writers and the coaches have them. I think the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is going to have them near number 10. I saw where several, like Joel Klatt, people like that, have thrown out their top 10. Oklahoma's number 9. I think Oklahoma's easy number 8, number 9 team right now. I'm probably looking at it through, I don't know what colored lens.
I just got an email.
Too close to the program, I don't know.
So I got your answer. I literally, and I'm sure you got the same email being in the football writers. I literally just received it. Oklahoma is 11. So 11, you're very, very close. It is above the 14. So it's not just too much homerism. They're right there. That ASTI, as an Oklahoma fan, though, I'm sure you're also going to hear, and this goes back to Lincoln Riley, it's almost another thing of you lost 1 more game than you should have to make it a special year. So is that, I guess that's my question, because this is the toughest defense OU's faced. If they would romp the Mountaineers and keep on winning and win the conference somehow, and you finish the year with this team with those 2 losses, do you predict Oklahoma fans are going to say, number 1, well, that's a great turnaround, Lincoln Riley's doing it again. Future, it'll be there next year. Or Oklahoma fans to say, you lost 2 games instead of 1. We can't get in the playoff. We're the 6th ranked team. I don't care about that bowl game that you're going to win. No, get in the playoff or don't talk to me. Is that where Oklahoma is? Because that seems to be the national perception of Oklahoma fans.
I think the overriding sentiment among this fan base is that they have embraced the idea that this is a super young team. 4 seniors on the 2 deep, okay, offense and defense, who have played here before. You've got 2 grad transfers who are seniors and never played. You've got another one who's a senior, who's a JUCO guy. He doesn't hardly play. So you've got 8 total seniors, but only 4 who have been invested for all 4 of their years here on the 2 deep. So OU fan right now is looking at this saying, we knew this was going to be a rebuilding year. Lincoln Riley might not have known this, but fans are saying, and most of them are pretty smart, they're saying, we knew this was going to be a rebuild year. They're looking at 21 as they run to the possible national championship, because Alex Grinch has this defense. We've discussed the West Virginia defense. Right. Alex Grinch has the Oklahoma defense playing at an incredibly high level right now. What I love about Saturday's game, Saturday night, another night game for the Sooners, I think this is their 5th, is that this is the matchup of number 1 versus number 2 in offense and number 1 versus number 2 in defense. This is going to be a fun game.
It's going to be a fun game, to say the least. And the Mountaineers are a team that, going into the year, they certainly didn't have conference title or national title implications. They were rebuilding. It's only the 2nd year for Neil Brown. But a positive, and we'll get to later, for the conference is the age of Lincoln Riley, the age of Neil Brown. I mean, Neil Brown's fitting in with that young mold of a guy who likely wants to be around the program for a while, and certainly has the administration behind him with Shane Lyons and company. So that's a positive, but the Mountaineer fans could certainly argue that maybe this is a year ahead of schedule if they would finally get a victory over Oklahoma, or if they can finish the year strong. If they don't get these victories and putter away the season, like has happened in recent years, then maybe they're still coasting and neutral. Granted, this is only year 2 of Neil Brown. So a lot riding on this game. Very interesting game. This is definitely a potential, maybe underrated game of the weekend overall in college football. and really could give either team, Mountaineers still in the race, even though not as much in the driver's seat as, say, Oklahoma, both still that puncher's chance. John Hoover here, the publisher of SI Sooner, the Sports Illustrated affiliate, allsooners.com here. Mike ASTI with you. WV Sports Now, Pittsburgh Sports Live, of course, bottom of the video. Make sure you smash that subscribe button to help us get the content to you. I do want to ask you, because we're talking about West Virginia and Oklahoma, big game, and both with a chance for the conference title. And it seems like deja vu for the Mountaineers year after year, and they certainly had this experience under Dana Holgorsen, where they would somehow find themselves in that conference title race, and a win over Oklahoma would either help out or could send them to the title game, and then all of a sudden the Sooners would just smack them in the mouth. There's been close games, but most of the time Oklahoma's got a pretty convincing victory over West Virginia, who, for the Mountaineers, one of the newer teams in the Big 12, have been able to beat most other teams. They've been able to get multiple victories over Texas. They've been able to get victories over the rest of the conference. Granted, there are still some that beat them up, like, say, Iowa State. But Kansas State, another team the Mountaineers are able to get wins over. But yet Oklahoma is that team that win, lose, or draw, good, bad, or ugly, it just seemingly all goes Oklahoma's way. This thought to be maybe the most vulnerable Oklahoma team for WVU to finally get that win. But as you said early in the show, Oklahoma is playing their best football of the year, and it's kind of unluckiness for West Virginia to be meeting them right now, despite potentially being a tough matchup for the Sooners. I do want to ask you, though, what is the Oklahoma perception, whether it be fans, media, players, coaches, anyone you've been around, you don't have to drop names, but just what you hear about West Virginia? And I've asked this to pretty much everyone else that I've had on this show, and that includes people that work for those schools. It includes others that are just covering, so maybe it gives a little bit less of a censored comment depending on who I was asking. But, now about a decade in here, what's the perception of the West Virginia Mountaineers in the Big 12 from the behemoth of the conference historically? So I'd love to hear this more than maybe anybody else's perception of West Virginia.
Okay, I'll try. I can give you a clear.
You don't have to be
nice.
You don't have to be nice if it's
absolutely
not nice.
No, but I can give you the clear media perspective is we love West Virginia. We love going to West Virginia, and we love having all the people from the team in Norman, in Oklahoma City, and Tulsa, whatever. So in terms of professionalism, hospitality, the press box atmosphere, man, it's one of the best in the Big 12.
Yeah.
Okay,
you don't mind the travel?
I'm not a big fan of the travel. I like going to Pittsburgh. Okay, I like going to Pittsburgh, especially this year. I got to spend an extra couple of days with to keep my airfare down. I spend an extra day in the hotel, so I'll get to see a little more Pittsburgh. Okay. And I think for the most part, I think the media folks who cover Oklahoma have nothing but good things to say about Morgantown. I've never had to sit on a burning couch, so everything is good there, right? Everything, nobody burned my couch, so we're all good. And then now the fan base, West Virginia joined, and TCU joined right about that time. I know you remember this, when Louisville went to the Final Four, went to a BCS bowl game, went to, I think, the women's Final Four, had a good run in the women's basketball, and then went to the College World Series. And everybody was saying, Dan Beebe and Bob Bowlesby and you Big 12 idiots, why didn't you get Louisville in here? Why didn't you get Louisville instead of West Virginia? Who the hell is West Virginia? That was the initial reaction, and not just from OU fans. That was from around the conference. Everybody was like, Louisville's the – well, now we see that things have kind of leveled out a little bit. And Louisville's not what they were in 2012 and 2013, and West Virginia's brings a ton of quality across the board. And so, I think people are looking at West Virginia now more in the vein of a conference brother versus an outsider, a newcomer, you're not one of us kind of thing.
Okay. Interesting. I will tell you that when I did the TCU preview, they still feel like outsiders in the conference, which I found it interesting because the difference of the Mountaineers and TCU entering the Big 12, I would imagine from an Oklahoma perspective, is West Virginia still not to Oklahoma's level, but an historic program success, major conference. And you mentioned Louisville success. To be fair also to West Virginia, as I got to say this, only 2 years earlier, the Mountaineers went to a Final Four. Only a few years earlier before that, it was a 4 or 5 year run of BCS bowl games and BCS championships and Sweet 16 to Elite Eights, etc. And success across soccer and across the board. So the Mountaineers program athletically was very, very successful even entering the conference. Not, of course, to in a calendar year doing it all the way through, but the Mountaineers were bringing a lot. And TCU was coming from a non-Power 5. So I don't know if that's maybe why they feel that way, that maybe they're not getting the same respect, because before LaDainian Tomlinson, I don't know if anyone knew of TCU. Yeah. And then kind of dropped off for a couple of years.
Consider where they were, where TCU was. They were right up in the catbird seat. Dallas-Fort Worth, being able to recruit whoever they wanted to recruit. Obviously against Texas and A&M, they were a little bit behind the curve. But then the Southwest Conference joins with the Big Eight and says, you guys, that's your room over there. That's the kiddie table over there. You can play in whatever conference you want. And, of course, TCU did. They switched conferences like 5 times in those years. So,
well, they were able to land.
They've got a little chip on their shoulder for sure.
I'd imagine. And they did have a special year in the mix there before entering as well. They were able to kind of do a Boise State thing and take a little easier schedule into a BCS run. So kudos to them for that. But the TCU game is over, at least for the Mountaineers. Again, here, John Hoover, publisher of SI Sooners, allsooners.com. Here, Mike ASTI, previewing WVU and Oklahoma. And I do feel like that I feel that to be the case amongst who I talk to, certainly in terms of media, even in terms of fans, I will say. And I will say there's a little false narrative there on the Mountaineer fan celebration. It definitely gets rowdy, but every time it always makes me laugh when there's a team that celebrates a championship and you see something burning even after the San Francisco Giants won the World Series, and I'm like, it's not just in Morgantown, guys. This is happening all over the place. They did it before everybody else, so I think it became the false narrative that attached itself to the Mountaineers through the rest of time. I do want to ask you though, and this kind of maybe goes back to what we were talking about, the perception for the fans of Oklahoma, and they're the team the Big 12 is going to usually be carrying to the playoff, the team the college football playoff is going to love the most. The Big 12, though, has been that conference that almost feels like the outsider of the major college football conferences in a way in recent years, for sure, especially this year, where it was literally week 4, and I had to drop the conversation of can the Big 12 get in the college football playoff. It was ludicrous at that point. I was getting criticized for just trying to beat the band on it. It didn't even make any sense anymore. So especially this year, with Oklahoma getting in, but always being that 4th team and then going ahead and losing right away. And even years past, after that 2000 national title with Bob Stoops, even criticism for him of you're in the game, playing USC, but never really contending in those games. And maybe Oklahoma's getting credit for appearances because of who they are, but then embarrassing the conference, say, is a criticism when they get there. With the thought of the Big 12 not being the defensive conference, maybe that narrative is going away a little bit with Oklahoma, with West Virginia, even TCU, and some other teams that are doing it defensively this year when they're having success, even Texas. But what needs to happen for you, for the Big 12 to join the party and stop being the 5th team or 4th team out of these major conferences for the college football world, outside of the college football playoff expanding, which maybe that'll happen at some point, and then they're always going to at least get a team in. But as we stand here at 4, what needs to happen for the Big 12 to not either always be the team looking on the outside looking in, or be that number 4 seed? Is that even possible, or is the perception too far gone unless there's an expansion, or unless Oklahoma would have a year where they can be historically good? If Oklahoma is just regularly good, how can the Big 12 be more respected, I guess, overall in the country?
Yeah, it starts, Mike, it starts for me with one thing: win a college football playoff game. Hasn't happened yet. Big 12 is winless. Right. And it's winless for a reason. There have been, I think, on the whole, one of the games was close at the end, like a 10-point, 11-point game against Alabama. But, the only other game was the overtime game between Oklahoma and Georgia out in the Rose Bowl.
Right.
All the rest of them have not been close. Oklahoma's been taken to the woodshed. So you've seen the SEC get two teams in. You've seen the Big Ten be in discussion for possibly getting two
The
teams
ACC
in. Meanwhile,
this year, maybe. Yeah.
ACC, absolutely. Meanwhile, you see the Big 12. Can they get one team in? That's the discussion with the Big 12. Not can they get two or which one will it be? It's can they even get one? Well, this year it's not going to even be one, although Lincoln Riley said yesterday, not over yet, but it's over. Somebody needs to.
You would need some crazy chaos that it would
legit.
It would be.
And it's 2020, so who can say that it won't happen?
True, absolutely.
So, but no, you got to win a college football playoff game. It's been 20 years now since Oklahoma's national championship, right? And that's a long time. That's the longest in school history since they won their first one way back in 1950. Now consider that for the entire conference, it's been 15 years since Vince Young skated across the goal line against USC in 2005 to win the Rose Bowl and win the national championship. 15 years this conference has gone without a national championship. Before that, from the birth of the conference, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 3, 2004, they had a team in the discussion every year. One of the top one of the top 2 or 3 teams, if I could get that out, either in the discussion or actually in the national championship game.
Right.
And they went from that to, gee, can we be one of the top 4? So you're right. The narrative on the Big 12 has become it's kind of a JV league. They don't play defense like the SEC does. They don't have the elite defenders like some of the best ACC teams or Big 10 teams do. That may be changing a little bit. We may be seeing a little bit of a migration. Look at some of the scores. I mean, 20-13, 20-17, 20-16, I think was one of the scores this year. Things may be changing, and maybe look at the scores in the SEC. I wrote about this early in the year. Some of the scores in the SEC are, 40s and 30s, which is where the Big 12 was just a few years ago. And meanwhile, the scores in the Big 12 are 20s and teens, which is where the SEC has always been. So things may be evolving a little bit. But if they don't win that first playoff game, I don't think anybody on a national level is ever going to take the Big 12 seriously.
Yeah, and I think the other issue is since the Vince Young national title, which is the last one for any Big 12 team, Texas dropped off the map. That really was their last truly elite season. They've had other good seasons every year. They claim they're back. They are yet to actually be back. So that, I think, is the other issue, because the casual fan, if you're naming 2 Big 12 teams, you're going to say Oklahoma and you're going to say Texas. And if Texas is not there joining them, it's going to be harder on the conference in terms of depth. And everyone else has kind of been up in the air. The Mountaineers get in within the last decade. So you're talking about a lot of different teams involved. Go ahead.
I'll throw a quick stat at you. In the last 10 years, Texas has the Big 12's 7th best record.
Yeah.
Do what now? Texas? Yeah, that's a fact. So Tom Herman doing a little bit of work, but remember that 2009, I think it was since that 2009 national championship loss to Alabama when Colt McCoy hurt his shoulder.
Yeah, they were in.
Ever since then, I think they have the 7th best record in the Big 12 conference, which is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and before Vince Young and Mac Brown, I don't think Mac Brown gets maybe as much credit as he should. He didn't at the end of it was a bit rough, but he resurrected a program that was not in elite status for multiple decades and put it into one, into 2 national title game appearances and 1 national championship. And having Vince Young there is certainly going to help you win, especially against the team they beat. But the teams you were even mentioning, because my first thought is when you talk about 96 on, to be fair, you're talking about teams always in the top 3. You're talking about Nebraska for the first 4 years before Oklahoma's 2000 national title. So that's a totally team that's not even a part of things anymore in the Big 12. Not that the Big 12 was probably too upset based on what Nebraska's program has become. But when you think about it, it's different teams vying for it. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe conference realignment hurt the Big 12 more than other major conferences because it was just more of a catastrophic change with new teams, kind of the ACC too, but they were lucky to have an early national title, and now they're getting some more depth. But it's just interesting.
Texas is still 7th.
Yeah,
Even though Nebraska left and A&M left,
yeah.
Kansas State has fallen off, Missouri left, Colorado left, Kansas or Texas is still 7th. They still can't get any higher than that. It's incredible.
I'm sure you guys don't mind it. I'm sure you guys don't.
You know, OU fans are loving that, man.
Yeah,
but,
I'm sure you don't mind that. Yeah, but it does put a lot of pressure on Oklahoma to when you get in, you have to get it done, and getting in is no longer good because we also experienced in the midst of that decade, going back to TCU and Baylor were right there, and they had a year where they were knocking on the door, 2 teams right there, and neither got in, and the Big 12 did not even crown a champion. So I'm also not sure if there's still a stain from that year because the conference didn't do anyone any favors and kind of messed things up that season. And the Mountaineers got involved too with getting a win against those 2 teams and kind of screwing things up here. John Hoover, publisher of SI Sooners, allsooners.com, a Sports Illustrated affiliate there, covering the Oklahoma Sooners, of course. I do want to get you out of here with this, and it's a simple question, but it's a preview question as we're previewing a big game certainly of the weekend that has implications on Oklahoma having their crazy, chaotic year that if they somehow can even warrant Lincoln Riley going on SportsCenter and making up some argument that I don't know how he's going to make up right now. He can maybe, that's what's happening in our world these days. People are arguing things you wouldn't think could be argued. So I certainly will be interesting to see what he comes up with there. But based on here in reality, if Oklahoma wins this game, what happened? Because it could just be as easy as their offense keeps turning it on and they finally crack the Mountaineer defense and cause some turnovers against Mountaineers offense with Deggy, who's prone to throw some picks. But if Oklahoma wins, what happens? And if the Mountaineers get this upset and get that first victory over Oklahoma, do it for Neil Brown, it would be a big one. It would be the first legit win for Neil Brown. His biggest win right now is against Kansas State, who was number 16. While Oklahoma's 14-11 in the college football playoff right now, that would be a much bigger win, I would say, for Neil Brown in the program. And if Neil Brown gets that and the Mountaineers get that, what do you think occurred and how did doomsday occur to cancel Lincoln Riley's appearance on those national shows for the Mountaineers win?
Okay, so we'll eliminate injuries. We'll eliminate crazy turnovers or anything like that, the obvious stuff.
Even controversy.
There you go. Even a replay somewhere, right? Goodness gracious.
Right.
So what would happen if West Virginia wins? Oklahoma would blow a double-digit lead, 121 to 17. I think their first quarter score is. They're just blitzing people, just absolutely blitzing people out of the gate. So I expect Oklahoma to start fast. If Oklahoma loses, it means that they've given up a double-digit lead again, like they did against Iowa State, Kansas State, Texas. Okay. It looked like there might be some momentum for Oklahoma State to do it, but Oklahoma State couldn't sustain it. It got from 21-0 in the first quarter to 27-13 at halftime, and you thought, oh boy, here come the Cowboys. And Oklahoma turned on the defense, put their foot on the gas in the fourth quarter and separated. That's something that this Oklahoma team hasn't done. So maybe they backslide a little bit, in the road atmosphere. We'll remove COVID from the situation too, because Oklahoma had to deal with some of that last week. I think 5 guys that were on the 2 deep were missing from that game. So that would be something that concerns me if I'm Oklahoma. I just wrote a story about that at SI Sooners just this afternoon about Oklahoma getting off to a fast start and then not finishing those games. They're actually getting outscored in the fourth quarter of this season. So I could see where West Virginia, Neil Brown says, you know what, we're behind, guys. Let's throw caution to the wind. We're going to throw it on every down. We're going to get Letty Brown split out wide. We're going to get him the ball in space.
Yeah.
We're going to go down the field with some vertical passing. I could see that. And, Oklahoma, their secondary, guys, it's the same secondary that ranked 129th 2 years ago and 8 in the 80s last year. So same guys, same group of players. So maybe they've grown up a little bit. Maybe they won't get bombarded like that. But if Neil Brown and Seth Deggy and those guys, Jarrett Deggy and those guys decide to do that, that would be something that would not surprise me too much.
If Oklahoma wins, though, is it just as simple as the same old story the last 4 or 5 weeks, or is there anything different that needs to be done for Oklahoma to win like they've been against the West Virginia defense? Because that front is not something Oklahoma experienced, especially with the Stills brothers. Does Oklahoma need to change that game plan at all to win, or is what they've been doing and just placing it against a better defense going to still be good enough?
We talked to their right tackle today, Adrian Ely, and he's certainly looking across. He said, this is the kind of challenge that we love. This is the reason why you come to Oklahoma. This is the reason why you play these big games against players like the Stills brothers. So they're fired up about it. I don't think they're scared or anything like that, but it's going to be a good matchup. Oklahoma's offensive line has gone from not real great in the first few games, despite returning all 5 starters from last year's team, which was amazing, remember, to now they've kind of figured some things out. Lincoln Riley's had to, adjust some protections and move some guys around just a little bit, not too much. And you've seen the main thing is, again, Ramondre Stevenson is back. And I'm telling you, he's special. He's really, really good. He's an NFL guy for sure. And then the growing up of the quarterback and the receiver core. They've got a young, unproven receiver core. If they can get the football to those guys consistently, if Spencer Rattler doesn't get shaken, and we've got no reason to believe he will. He handled Bedlam beautifully, handled his 2 back-to-back road games in Texas against TCU and Texas Tech. He handled those beautifully. Right. And he handled the overtime period against Texas in the Cotton Bowl beautifully. So he's really grown up. I expect him to play well just because that's what he's been doing. He's been on that streak of 5 straight games now where he's played really, really well. If he doesn't, if they get to him, if they knock a ball around, if they sling him around a little bit, get some pressure on him, make him throw it before he wants to, make him uncomfortable a little bit, confuse him a little bit with some of the reads in the secondary, that's when West Virginia can win. If they don't do that, if he's back there and he's comfortable, I think Oklahoma does win fairly comfortably.
Hearing you talk, it makes me believe the Mountaineers don't have a chance in this one, despite them playing well, because I will tell you that the Mountaineers, I'd be willing to bet the house, are going to get down in this game, and I don't know if I would feel confident in them coming back when getting down. However, you do provide maybe some optimism for Mountaineer fans in terms of that secondary, because WVU getting down early, which almost seemingly is a guarantee, might actually be a recipe for success for West Virginia, because that might force Neil Brown to get in the mold of going more one-dimensional and using Letty Brown as more of a receiver than just a conventional running back, which can be a great offense for West Virginia. They just don't do it all the time. If he is forced into doing that, then it might make the Oklahoma secondary have to go to work, and that might potentially be the problem. It will be interesting also to see how much Letty Brown can be involved in this game, because Mountaineers obviously are at their best when he's at their best, and he's been the team MVP this year. But his success might be the best defensive part for Oklahoma. They might be able to stop him, and certainly would much rather Jared Dagey have to stop them than Letty Brown, I'd imagine. So it's going to be an interesting game, to say the least. Certainly will be the biggest win for Neil Brown here 2 years in for him as West Virginia head coach. Would even be big for the program in the Big 12 because it hasn't happened. And obviously Oklahoma, a victory. They could, if you're talking about quality wins, and based on how the Mountaineers have played recently, they could hang this as a quality win, maybe more so than the recent ones. And either way, I think we both can hope there's no controversy involved, because Mountaineer fans still feel like that maybe they got jobbed out of the Texas game, even though that team did not play that well in that game. But certainly there was controversy towards the end of that game. So I certainly think West Virginia would like a year where they don't have controversy in both of those 2 top Big 12 games, which right now could be the case. And I wouldn't be shocked, because, of course, it is 2020. John, I absolutely appreciate the time. If there ever was a year, this would be the 2020 story, that Oklahoma gets somehow in the college football playoff because of 2020. You just have tons of chaos, and this is the year that Oklahoma wins the college football playoff game. That would be buck wild if I've ever seen it.
It had to have been that huge win at West Virginia that got them into the college football playoff. That's what it was. When you look back on the season that is 2020. And by the way, I can't believe it's been 9 years since Jarrett Dagey came to Norman, Oklahoma as a 31-point underdog and scored the biggest upset in school history from Texas Tech. And that's still the first Dagey that comes to my mind. Seth Dagey.
Seth Dagey.
I'm just like, did I say Jarrett? Just now?
You just did Jared. Yeah, you just did the
See,
Jared now and switched
I'm
them out
trying to make
again.
up for saying Seth earlier and
Yeah,
saying Jared earlier.
the problem from the West Virginia perspective, though, is I think there's been too much Deggy conversation around the Big 12 because the absolute worst game he's played all year is back home in Lubbock, Texas.
Yeah.
By far, it's like a different guy. I will tell you with some advice, I wouldn't even watch that film because he's been way better in every other game. As long as he's not in Lubbock, Texas, I think he's okay.
Right.
But that seemingly has been the main issue. But John Hoover there, publisher of SI Sooners, allsooners.com, the Sports Illustrated affiliate, covering the Oklahoma Sooners. We're definitely going to have a good one, or at least both teams are going to hope. Certainly the Mountaineers are going to hope, I would say. Oklahoma could win in the blood. The Mountaineers aren't blowing anybody out, so it'll be a close game if the Mountaineers have a chance at winning this. Again, 7:30 p.m., late Saturday night. Oklahoma's used to it. The Mountaineers are not this year, so that'll be interesting. Not a noon kickoff for West Virginia, and we'll see what happens in terms of the Big 12 conference race, which right now is still wide open, and I'm personally pulling for chaos just to have it, just to be entertained throughout the quarantine, the home studios in 2020. Let's just have some chaos out there. But again, I want to remind all of you to follow us throughout the Now family of networks, of course, WV Sports Now, where this show will live, Pittsburgh Sports Live as well for your Mountaineers coverage there at WV Sports Now. But make sure you click subscribe on the bottom of this video. It's going to be a great one. It's going to be that one game that will always stick in Mountaineer fans' craw until they finally defeat the Oklahoma Sooners, but we'll see if Neil Brown can finally get it done.